How does the last chapter of Mark point to the reliability of the New Testament? That's what we're talking about today on Byte-Size Theology. Hello and welcome to Byte-Size Theology. My name is Philip Nelson and we are continuing in Mark for our summer reading challenge of 2022. Today's reflections from Mark chapter 16 address the resurrection of Jesus and the reliability of the New Testament. Mark chapter 16 has three main movements, and it's divided into two different endings. First, we have the shorter ending of Mark, which has section 1, the women being the first witnesses to the resurrection. And then we have the longer ending of Mark, which then has the two remaining sections. Section 2, Jesus appears to his followers, and section 3, Jesus' ascension. Today's episode will focus on the resurrection and briefly on the ending of Mark and the reliability of the New Testament. So getting into part 1, he is risen. Mark records that when the Sabbath had passed, 3 women journeyed to the tomb of Jesus. How did they know where to go? Well, 2 of these women were there and they saw where he was laid. We see that in Mark 15, verse 47. As they were on their way, they were asking each other who would roll away the large stone which was sealing the entrance of the tomb. We see that in 15:46, but specifically those questions in chapter 16, verse 3. To their shock, when they reached the tomb, the stone was rolled away. Mark was careful to note it was very large, almost as though he was saying there is no way that just these women could have moved this stone. And then they hear a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe, say to them, "Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is risen, and he is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee." That's Mark 16, verses 6 through 7. So Mark records here that these women were the first witnesses of the empty tomb. Now, it's interesting because that certainly would have been something for a first century account that would have been embarrassing. The culture of the time did not value the eyewitness account of women to the same level as men, and yet this is what Mark records. And that brings me to a large issue, one that for me has been significant for my Christian walk, and that is part 2, the resurrection and the reality and the reliability of the New Testament. When it comes to such a cornerstone issue as the physical, bodily resurrection of Jesus from the dead, we need to honestly consider whether we trust the New Testament or not. Particularly for me, my journey started with assessing the arguments for and against the resurrection. While I cannot address everything in this short video, I would like to share what I found to be perhaps the most succinct and accessible argument. It is called the minimal facts approach, and it is presented in the book The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus by Gary Habermas and Michael Licona. I have included a link for this book as well as other books on the resurrection in the description below. Habermas and Licona in the minimal facts approach only consider data that meets 2 criteria. 1, the data are strongly evidenced, and 2, the data are granted by virtually all scholars on the subject, even the skeptical ones. Using this criteria, there are 4 minimal facts plus 1 fact that enjoys acceptance by an impressive majority of scholars, though not nearly every scholar. So what are these bedrock facts? So, fact 1, Jesus died by crucifixion. This is attested by 5 ancient non-Christian sources. Fact 2, Jesus' disciples believed that he rose and appeared to them. They claimed it. We see that clearly in both the oral and written traditions. We see also that they believed it. 7 ancient sources attest to their willingness to suffer and die for their claim. Fact number 3, the church persecutor Paul was suddenly changed. We consider his conversion from somebody who was persecuting the church to a subsequent sufferer and martyr for his belief. Fact number 4, the skeptic James, the brother of Jesus, was also suddenly changed. As with Paul, we consider the conversion of this man who was against initially Jesus and what he was saying. In fact, he called him crazy, but then we see his subsequent suffering and martyrdom. Fact number 5, the tomb was empty. How can we claim this? Well, Jesus was crucified and his post-mortem appearances all occurred in Jerusalem. If the tomb was occupied, the matter could be settled with producing the body. Further, Jesus' enemies ended up producing a story rather than a body. They produced a story that the disciples had stolen the body, and thus further confirm that the body was in fact missing. And finally, as we have already mentioned, the Gospels point to the testimony of women, which would have been questionable in that first century. So, the only way to account for these 5 minimal facts is that Jesus physically rose from the dead. I would encourage you, my friend, to dig deep into this topic. If you're going to examine anything, examine this. So as I consider these minimal facts, I am not only convinced that the experience of my life, that the risen Christ has transformed me inside and out, but also now my faith is bolstered and I rejoice in the reliability of the New Testament, that my confidence in Jesus is not in contradiction to reality. So what does all of this have to do with Mark? And that brings us to part 3, the ending of Mark. When we look at Mark 16, verses 9 through 20, many of your translations will include a statement like what is found in the ESV. Some of the earliest manuscripts do not include chapter 16, verses 9 through 20. So how do I handle this? Does this mean that I cannot trust the Bible and what I have in my English translation? Well, quite the opposite. A responsible translation of the Bible will disclose where there are significantly disputed words, phrases, or sections. However, in each case, we can confidently say that no point of doctrine is affected by these variations or by the absence or presence of some questionable sections. If you want to dig deeper into the topic of why we should trust the Bible, I highly recommend the following 2 books for their accessibility and ease of reading. First, I would recommend Why Trust the Bible by Greg Gilbert. If you were going to buy one, I would start there. And second, Cold Case Christianity, a homicide detective investigates the claims of the Gospels by J. Warner Wallace. See the description for the links. So, what can we say about the ending of Mark? I appreciate this note from the ESV Study Bible. It says that this section is placed within brackets, showing their doubts as to whether it was originally part of what Mark wrote. But it also recognizes its long history of acceptance by many throughout the church, and indeed some manuscripts have this section of Mark in there. Again, there's nothing in these verses that cannot be seen or at least explained with reference to other verses in either the Gospels or the rest of the New Testament. So, my friend, as you consider this chapter of Mark, Mark 16, and the bedrock facts with which everyone has to wrestle, what comes to your mind and your heart? As for me, I have staked my whole life on the reliability of the resurrection and have known the great joy of walking with my Lord through all of life's ups and downs. There is a bedrock anchor for my soul, and that is the resurrection. So what is your response to the resurrected Jesus? Have you read through Mark chapter 16 yet? If you've been sticking with us in this reading plan, congratulations! You have completed the first book. What has been your favorite part of this reading challenge so far? Please let me know in the comments below. If you have not joined us yet in this summer reading challenge, you can still jump in. We're going to be going through the book of Acts next. I've included a link to find the PDF for the reading plan in the description below. And as always, I want to say thank you so much for joining me today on Byte-Size Theology. Until next time, my friends, may our great and gracious God grant you focused, faithful, and fruitful time in His Word. I'll see you over in the next episode.